Helen Wallace and Gerald Foster boarded the Ocean Pearl as a picture-perfect newlywed couple in their golden years. But by the end of the cruise, Helen would be dead and Gerald would be in handcuffs, accused of a murder so calculated it shocked everyone who thought they knew him. Helen Wallace had always believed in second chances. After losing her husband of 40 years to cancer, she never thought love would find her again. For over a decade, she filled her days with gardening, church events, and book club meetings, slowly adjusting to a life of solitude. Then came Gerald Foster, a soft-spoken widower with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. They met at a charity auction hosted by a local retirement community in Tampa, Florida. Helen had been volunteering, arranging auction items on a long, folding table, when Gerald struck up a conversation about a painting she was admiring. That conversation turned into coffee dates, walks in the park, and eventually an unexpected romance that brought a spark back into her life. Gerald had lost his wife 6 years earlier and, like Helen, had been alone for some time. He talked about how difficult the transition had been, but how meeting Helen felt like a fresh breeze in a closed room. Friends and family were surprised at how quickly the relationship developed, but Helen brushed off concerns. She said that, "When you reach a certain age, there's no time to waste." They were both in their 70s, healthy, and eager to live fully while they still could. Within 10 months, they were married. The ceremony was small but warm, held in a botanical garden, with roses blooming in every direction. Helen wore a pale blue dress and a string of pearls her daughter had given her, while Gerald stood beside her in a navy suit, beaming. They danced to an old Sinatra tune, toasted with champagne, and shared stories of their past lives with guests, who cheered on their new beginning. To celebrate, they booked a cruise to the Bahamas aboard the Ocean Pearl, a luxurious ship offering everything from nightly shows to gourmet dining and tropical excursions. It was Gerald's idea. He said he wanted their honeymoon to be something neither of them would forget. Helen had never been on a cruise before. She was excited about the sea air, the relaxation, and the chance to explore somewhere new. They, packed light, brought along sun hats and sandals, and boarded the ship with wide smiles and high hopes. The first few days of the voyage were picture-perfect. Helen and Gerald spent their mornings having breakfast on the deck, afternoons lounging by the pool, and evenings dining under chandeliers while listening to live music. Helen was especially fond of the dance nights. Even if her knees didn't move like they used to, she loved swaying slowly to the rhythm, feeling Gerald's hand on the small of her back. They took pictures at sunset, tried out island dishes, and signed up for a couple's spa day. To everyone watching, they seemed like the ideal pair, two people who had found each other after loss and built something beautiful in the twilight of their lives. But while Helen looked at Gerald with affection, no one noticed how often he looked over his shoulder. No one paid attention to the small moments of tension, and no one imagined that this joyful honeymoon would end in unthinkable violence. The 6th day of the cruise began with sunshine and calm seas as the Ocean Pearl docked in Nassau. Passengers eagerly stepped off the ship for a day of exploring, shopping, and sightseeing on the vibrant Bahamian island. Most were in high spirits, chatting over breakfast and planning their adventures. But when Helen Wallace didn't appear at the morning buffet, a few fellow guests took notice. She had made friends during onboard activities and was known for her warmth and friendliness. When someone asked Gerald where she was, he simply said Helen hadn't been feeling well and decided to rest in their cabin. At first, there was no reason to be suspicious. Older travelers often needed extra rest, and seasickness wasn't uncommon. But as the hours passed, concern began to build. By early afternoon, a housekeeper entered the Wallace's cabin to clean, expecting to find Helen resting. Instead, the room was empty and eerily quiet. The bed was made, the bathroom unused, and Helen's belongings were all untouched. Her cruise ID badge, purse, sunglasses, and medications were still on the nightstand. A sun hat lay folded neatly near the foot of the bed. Nothing had been packed or moved. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. The housekeeper alerted her supervisor, who then informed security. A ship-wide search was initiated, starting with a head count of all passengers and a thorough sweep of the couple's cabin. Staff knocked on doors, paged Helen's name over the intercom and checked every lounge, restaurant and deck. There was no sign of her. When interviewed again, Gerald remained calm, insisting Helen must have taken a walk early in the morning and simply lost track of time. He mentioned she sometimes liked quiet moments to herself, especially near the back of the ship where it was less crowded, but his answers raised more questions than they answered. Surveillance footage became the next step. Security reviewed hours, a video from the ship's many cameras, focusing on the lower promenade deck, where Helen was last seen around 9:40 p.m. the night before. She appeared to be alone, walking slowly and pausing at the railing to look out at the water. She wasn't carrying anything, not even her handbag or sweater. That was the last recorded sighting of her. Later footage showed Gerald entering their cabin shortly after 10 p.m. What troubled investigators was that no footage ever captured Helen re-entering the room, nor was there any record of her accessing restricted areas or disembarking in Nassau. Questions mounted quickly. Why would Helen go out late at night alone, leaving behind everything she usually carried? Why didn't she tell anyone where she was going? And if she had fallen overboard, why didn't anyone hear or see it happen? With the ship set to remain docked until evening, the captain contacted Bahamian authorities and the FBI, given the likelihood that the ship would soon leave international waters. The case had shifted from a missing person alert to a full investigation. Helen Wallace hadn't just disappeared, she had seemingly been erased from the ship without a trace. As the investigation deepened, the fairy tale image of Helen and Gerald's honeymoon began to crack. What once looked like a joyful second marriage now appeared increasingly suspicious. The more authorities uncovered about Gerald Foster, the more troubling the picture became. In their initial interviews, ship staff described Gerald as polite, if somewhat reserved. He had not raised alarm when Helen was first noticed missing, and he showed little visible distress when questioned by security. His demeanor was strangely neutral, even as other passengers began whispering about the unfolding mystery. He continued, eating in the dining hall, attending events, and even participating in a trivia night while Helen remained unaccounted for. To investigators, this behavior was far from the reaction of a worried or grieving husband. When the FBI joined the case, they began examining Gerald's background. A check into his past revealed a striking coincidence. His first wife, Patricia Foster, had died in an alleged household accident 6 years earlier. According to the official report, she had fallen down a flight of stairs in their home in rural Georgia. Gerald had been the only witness. Though there was no direct evidence of foul play at the time, some of Patricia's relatives had raised quiet concerns about Gerald's temper and how he isolated her in the final years of her life. The case had been closed without charges, but it was enough to raise red flags now. Investigators then turned to Gerald's financial records and made another disturbing discovery. Just 3 weeks before the cruise, Gerald had taken out a travel insurance policy. The policy specifically covered accidental death while abroad, and it listed Helen as the insured party with Gerald as the sole beneficiary. The payout in the event of a fatal incident during travel was set at $250,000. When questioned about it, Gerald claimed Helen had insisted on it for peace of mind, given their age and the risks of international travel. But no such conversation could be verified, and Helen's children later said she had never mentioned the policy at all. Back in the couple's cabin, a forensic team conducted a closer examination. Though the surfaces were clean at first glance, luminol testing revealed faint traces of blood in several areas. The largest concentrations were found in the bathroom and under the carpeting near the edge of the bed. Investigators also noticed that a section of the carpet had been scrubbed more aggressively than the rest, as if someone had tried to erase something. Samples were collected and sent for DNA analysis. While waiting for results, authorities searched the ship's service areas. Gerald had been caught by internal motion sensors in a crew-only maintenance corridor between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., the very night Helen disappeared. When asked why he was there, Gerald said he had gotten disoriented after drinking, but investigators didn't buy the excuse. That part of the ship was not easily accessible and would have required passing several clearly marked authorized personnel-only signs. The evidence was building. Helen Wallace hadn't just vanished. Something had happened in that cabin. And Gerald Foster, once the charming widower who had promised her a new life, was now the central suspect in her disappearance. As forensic results confirmed that the blood found in the couple's cruise cabin belonged to Helen Wallace, the investigation entered a critical stage. There was no longer any doubt that Helen had suffered a violent injury. The luminol revealed blood patterns consistent with blunt force trauma, sharp irregular splatters in the bathroom, and one large, almost circular stain beneath the carpet near the bed. The violence had occurred inside that room, in the place where she was meant to feel safe. The next major break came when investigators turned their attention to the restricted maintenance areas of the ship. Security logs and motion detectors showed that Gerald had accessed a section of the ship known only to crew, an industrial maintenance level that contained storage units, mechanical systems, and a laundry incinerator used to dispose of damaged linens. This area was strictly off-limits to passengers. Cameras showed Gerald entering this area late at night and leaving just before dawn. When asked again about this movement, Gerald repeated his claim that he had gotten lost while taking a walk. Investigators now believed he had gone there with purpose. A search of the maintenance level was ordered immediately. Hidden inside a narrow access chute near the incinerator, detectives made a disturbing discovery. Tucked among discarded rags and burnt fabric scraps were several fragments of clothing. One piece, a partially burned swatch of floral fabric, matched the dress Helen had been wearing the night she disappeared. Forensic testing confirmed it was hers. More tellingly, the fabric was stained with blood and human tissue. The incinerator was then examined. Though temperatures inside the unit reached levels capable of destroying most organic matter, technicians found a single, charred, but identifiable earring in the ashtray. It matched a pair Helen was known to wear often, simple pearl studs gifted to her by her daughter before the cruise. The conclusion was chilling. Gerald had not only killed Helen but had attempted to destroy the evidence by using the ship's incinerator to dispose of her body and belongings. By now the case was airtight. Gerald Foster was arrested on board the Ocean Pearl just hours before the ship returned to U.S. waters. Passengers were stunned. Many had shared meals with the couple or danced beside them during themed parties. None could believe the quiet, gentle man in their photographs was now accused of a brutal and calculated murder. As the arrest was made, Gerald remained expressionless. He offered no resistance, no emotion, and no explanation. In his cabin, investigators found a pocket-sized notebook. Inside were rough sketches of the ship's floor plans, including restricted areas. It suggested premeditation. He had studied the ship, its layout, and possible places to conceal or destroy evidence. The murder had not been a crime of passion. It had been planned. Helen Wallace, who had trusted Gerald with her heart and her future, had unknowingly walked into a trap. Her honeymoon cruise, a dream escape filled with promise, had ended not in celebration but in betrayal, blood, and fire. The trial of Gerald Foster captured national attention. News outlets across the country picked up the story of the elderly honeymooner accused of killing his new bride aboard a luxury cruise ship. It was the kind of case that stunned even seasoned investigators. A man in his 70s with no previous criminal record, standing accused of not only murdering his wife, but attempting to erase all evidence of her existence. The contrast between the romantic fantasy of a late-in-life second marriage and the gruesome reality of the crime was too dramatic to ignore. In court, prosecutors presented a compelling and methodical case. They outlined the timeline, introduced the surveillance footage, and laid out the forensic findings. The blood evidence in the cabin, the partially incinerated clothing, the single pearl earring, and the notebook with hand-drawn maps of the ship's restricted areas painted a chilling picture. The travel insurance policy, purchased just weeks before the cruise, was cited as the motive, a calculated plan to gain financially by orchestrating Helen's death. Witnesses were called, including ship staff, forensic experts, and Helen's children. Her daughter described Helen's joy in her new marriage and her excitement for the cruise, her voice breaking as she recalled their last phone call. A former colleague of Gerald's testified about his odd behavior after the death of his first wife, including sudden wealth he could never fully explain. The prosecution leaned heavily on the pattern of behavior. A man who found women late in life, isolated them, and then quietly benefited from their demise. Gerald's defense attempted to argue that Helen's disappearance was a tragic accident. They suggested she may have fallen overboard or wandered into a dangerous area in a confused state. They argued that the blood found in the cabin could have been the result of an unrelated medical incident, and that Gerald's presence in the maintenance areas was a product of disorientation, not guilt. But these claims unraveled quickly under scrutiny. The evidence was too precise, too damning, and the jury was not convinced. After a 3-week trial, the verdict came swiftly. Gerald Foster was found guilty of first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no apology, no explanation, and no remorse. Gerald remained, silent as the sentence was read, staring ahead, hands folded in his lap. In the months following the trial, Helen's children scattered her ashes near the coast of Tampa Bay in a quiet ceremony attended by close friends and family. They remembered her as a woman full of grace, hope, and generosity, someone who had dared to believe in love again. The cruise ship, the Ocean Pearl, returned to service after a brief hiatus, but the memory of what had happened on board lingered among crew members and repeat passengers. The story of Helen Wallace served as a grim reminder that evil doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it wears a wedding band and smiles for photos,